who is going to talk us through some data and insight that's relevant to Bolsover. I'll just go through some housekeeping really. So we are recording this meeting and it will go online at some point. So if you don't want to be on camera, then just feel free to turn your cameras off. If everyone can keep their lines on mute if they're not talking, that's really helpful because it stops any echo. Utilise the chat as much as you want for any questions that we can come back to, or put your hands up if you've got any questions and we will try to come back to you when it's appropriate. We'll just give you a quick overview of what's going to happen today. So if people can start putting who they are and what organisation they're from in the chat, that would be really helpful so we know who's here. Going to do we're going to do a bit of interaction, so there'll be a bit of Mentimeter, which is a survey which will show on screen, and then we're going to go into a short video around what Walk Derbyshire is and the systems approach, which is, it's a video because we've got 8 of these events and we want everyone to have the same, just turning the phone off, want everyone to have the same information coming through. So there's a little video. It's quite a lot of information in it, but as it's being recorded, you will have access to it anyway, so that's good. After the video, we're going to go into breakout rooms to talk about what a system approach looks like in Bolsover. Then we're going to have a short break, and then we're going to go into some data and insight with Scott, and then some discussion, and then talking about the next steps. So I can see people are already putting things in the chat, which is brilliant. If I can go on to the first Mentimeter. So Nikki, if you could put the Mentimeter link in the chat. People click on this link, it should take you to the Mentimeter. And the question is, why is walking important to you personally or in your work? So we've got some coming in now. So we've got physical and mental health, collaboration and joining up. It's how most people get their physical activity minutes. I value the physical and mental health benefits that walking can provide. One activity that's largely free. Headspace, yeah. Help to maintain mental well-being and support building relationships. For health and fitness, explore the local areas, yeah. It says to try and get from A to B. I read to try and get to a B and B, which I thought was a strange answer, but I understand it now. Any more coming in? It's free, yeah, brilliant. That's fabulous. So all of these responses will come out in the post-meeting information that you'll get as well. And it'll be interesting to see if any of these responses change as we move on with this work. Just going to go into my short video now. It's around 8 minutes long. So, and as I said, there's lots of information, so try and listen in, but if you don't take it in, it is available elsewhere. So let me see if I can play it from here. Of course not. It's here somewhere. Here we go. I haven't shared the sound. Hold on. There we go. Try again. The vision of Walk Derbyshire is to make everyday walking the norm for all residents of Derbyshire, with a focus on our inactive population and our disadvantaged communities. We want to create a culture of walking with an emphasis around walking with our own communities and from our own doorsteps. We know that walking contributes to the vast majority of physical activity. It's available and accessible to everyone. There's an undaunting entry level, especially for those who are inactive. We know the physical and mental health benefits to walking. And when we talk about walking, we're talking about walking for both travel and for leisure. And we do know that walking is a cheap and clean way to travel. There are a number of elements to how Walk Derbyshire will be delivered. Insight and evaluation. Insight's important to ensure we're driven by our current knowledge and gaps in that knowledge and what walking levels look like across Derbyshire between our different demographics and geographies. Pressfed have been commissioned to complete bespoke walking insight packs, which will be shared with you today with the aim to help guide conversations around how, where and who you can influence to walk more. Evaluation is important to capture and share learning on successes and things that could have gone better with a wider audience and to help us to iteratively change our approach to Walk Derbyshire. Leeds Beckett University are our Walk Derbyshire evaluation partners and they'll be embedding themselves into our work. A PhD student will be recruited to start in February 2023 and their initial focus will be on Walk Derbyshire. Communication and engagement. We need to build relationships across all sectors and with the communities that we work with. And we need to recognise the importance of co-production in everything that we do. When it comes to workforce, we need to make sure we're supporting them. Our workforce includes those who directly engage with people about walking to those who could advocate walking as part of their wider work. These could be people who are either paid or in voluntary roles. So what do they need to be able to enable people to walk more and how can we support them? As part of our work, Walk Derbyshire will invest across the county to enable us to evaluate and share learning around how we support our residents to walk more on an everyday basis. Chesterfield, Erewash, Bolsover and North East Derbyshire will have the opportunity to be active neighbourhood pilots. These are our 4 districts with the highest levels of inactivity and the highest levels of deprivation. And that will provide an opportunity for stakeholders to come together with their communities to agree on the best ways to invest funding on a place-based level to increase levels of walking. High Peak, Derbyshire Dales, South Derbyshire and Amber Valley will have the opportunity to be community engagement and co-production pilots. So that's working with the community to develop an understanding of the barriers and opportunities to support residents to walk more. Within our Walk Derbyshire pilots, there are some principles we aim to embed. They include tackling local inequality and working where the greatest need is. We need to ensure that targeted community engagement is embedded in co-creation, delivery and evaluation. We need to collaborate, share and learn across local priority places and share that learning across Derbyshire. We need to ensure that we're looking at a systems approach, considering the widest range of influences and interactions. We need to ensure our practice is inclusive and that all our opportunities are available to anyone. We need to make sure we're connecting communities and ensuring people can access appropriate local opportunities. And we want to embed the Walk Derbyshire vision at a local level. Today's session will help support the pilots, and moving on from this, each district and borough will look at developing a consortium who will develop their local bid and take the pilot work forward. The pilot work provides us with an opportunity for each district and borough to explore and develop a system approach to walking. I'm now going to hand over to James Cook, who will talk us through the complexities and benefits of a system approach to walking.
Walk Derbyshire aims to adopt a systems approach to walking. It's important for us to develop a shared understanding of what system working means to us. A system is a way of thinking about the bigger picture. Systems thinking is less concerned with how an individual, department or organisation operates, but more with how the connections, interactions and feedback between them help shape the outcomes we want to see. When considering the wider sectors that play a role in enabling people to move more, it includes partners such as health, community safety, voluntary community sector, business, highways and many, many more. So why is taking a systems approach important for Walk Derbyshire? Physical inactivity, like many other social outcomes, is complex. By this, we mean there are a range of different factors that will impact upon whether a person is or isn't active. If we think about some of those different factors, for example, are there footpaths for people to walk on and what condition are they in? Are there main roads to cross? Are there planning applications around active travel and what do these include? And do people feel safe in their own communities? All of those different factors are interacting with each other in different ways at different times. And of course, when we talk with our communities to understand their lives, what's important to them, and what would enable them to walk more, we need to remember that each individual and family unit will experience those factors in different ways. As with all complex issues, there isn't a single intervention or solution. There's not one organisation or individual that has the answers. Change requires collective action from across sectors at all layers. We need to work collaboratively with our communities and with different partners and different sectors to understand those factors impacting on whether people choose to walk, and what does that mean for our collective action. So how do we know that we are working in complexity? Well, some of what we do will be simple, some of it will be complicated, and some of it will be complex. For example, we know that something is simple if by taking an action, we know that it will achieve the desired outcome. For example, if we switch a light switch on, we know that the light will come on. For something that is complicated, we know that if we take several actions, often expert steps, that it will achieve the desired outcome. For example, a mechanic will know that when fixing a car engine, that they need to take several steps, often in the right order, at the right time, to achieve that desired outcome. In terms of complexity, well, we know we are working in complexity when we do not know in advance if something will work. For example, just because something works in one community, it does not mean that it will work in another community, or even that it would work in that same community a year down the line. It is important to recognise and understand when we are working in complexity. The good news is that although we do not know in advance if something will work, we can plan for working in complexity. Key to this is setting up processes to enable us to learn quickly about what is working so that we can amplify it. And just as importantly, learn quickly about what doesn't work so that we can stop or adapt. As we've established around inactivity, we know that we are working in complexity. So we need to feel comfortable that the work is to explore, experiment, and learn together about how Walk Derbyshire can enable people to walk.
The vision of Walk Derbyshire is to make everyday walking the norm for all residents of Derbyshire. Is it still playing on your end? Because it's still playing on mine. Hold on one sec, I just need to turn it off. Wow, it's hard enough hearing yourself over once, let alone hearing yourself in your own head again. Yeah, so thanks for watching that. If I can just ask you to fill in another Mentimeter, which Nikki will put on, and which is around which system partner you represent, and that'll help to show what sort of different representation that we have in the room today. And it'll be really interesting to see if we can make that grow as this work goes forward.
It's the same link, but I've just put it in again in case anyone's lost it.
Thanks, Nicola.
People get the same question. If they refresh, it should bring up the next question.
Sorry, Heather, can you see the?
Yes, yeah, you can see it.
Okay,
Brilliant.
great.
We've got a great big house. We've got Walk Derbyshire. We've got Bolsover District Council, Live Life Better, local authority. Countryside, BDC. Can't tell a connector. I can't tell if they're adding or just moving sometimes. Yes, it's quite a good mix of different people, which all contribute towards different parts of the walking system. So we're going to go into breakout rooms shortly, and Nikki's set them up already, so you will be automatically transported. So I'm going to facilitate one. Scott will have one. Jade has one, and Ange has one. Have we got 4, Nikki?
I have set up 4 at the moment. Is that okay?
Brilliant. Yeah, because I think
you just need to put Jonathan back in, I think, because he left. He's out. But yeah.
Brilliant. So you'll automatically be taken there, and then you've got 15 minutes, and we'll come back and we'll do a quick roundup of what the discussion was. The facilitator will do that talking, and then we'll have a quick break. You might be, when you leave your breakout room, you might have to rejoin the meeting because it's, for some people, for some reason, it doesn't automatically take you back.
Okay, so shall I open them now, Heather? Sorry.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Okay, I'm doing that now. It might just take a moment.
Thanks, Nikki. I think we might be missing one, but we started with 17, now we've got 16. Oh, here we go. There we go. Thanks very much, everyone. I know my room certainly had a great conversation, and I will feed my conversation back shortly. But if I come to Jade, can I come to you first to feedback your conversation?
Okay, somehow I knew that, and I was like, how do I gather my thoughts? Because yeah, we had a really good conversation as well. And yeah, I think picking up probably some of the themes that came out of that conversation, and I think where we finished, and then I'll go back to maybe where we started, was that real kind of reflection around the emphasis on health inequalities, and kind of realising the emphasis around the communities that we're trying to connect with and support a little bit more, and that real reflection that each individual has really different needs. And obviously we're going to hear some fantastic insight in a minute, but really thinking about how do we really build on that community engagement piece of work and hear from the different communities and work with the different communities to respond in a collective way. Kind of just recognising in terms of some of those individual behaviours around kind of some of the new communities that we've got in Bolsover and some of the reasons that they move into Bolsover, whether that be for work or for other reasons, and the role that walking can play in work for some of them that are coming in to join us, and kind of recognising on the kind of where we're at in terms of our working practices at the moment. It feels like we've got some really great partnerships and connections. How do we really move beyond that to work around shared purpose and collectively around some of those shared ambitions and aspirations? Hopefully reflects where we were just kind of getting to the bit around young people and reflecting where they're at, again, in terms of those different needs of communities as well.
Thanks, Jade. Did you have any discussion around, because I know we don't always get time, anybody else that we thought should be in the room that there wasn't?
I didn't get chance to ask that question. We were exploring a little bit more, and I guess just the only other bit kind of just to add in probably is around kind of recognising around the longevity of some of our infrastructure as well was certainly part of our conversation.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. It's all right, thanks, Jade. Scott, can I come to you next, please?
Yeah, sure. So I had Jonathan from within the NHS. I had Richard, who's a social prescribing link worker, and I had Justina, who's kind of works supporting the railway, local railways. So an interesting mix. And we had a conversation that started off, Jonathan in his work is around enabling different organizations to collaborate, and so the first part of the conversation was very much building on what had come out of the video around the complexity of, just look at all the different people and the roles on this on this call that have got an interest in walking, and yet we've got a list of people that are not even in the room yet, and so we talked about the connections that we need to make to those people in order to be able to remove barriers to make walking the new normal. I love the way that we use the word new. This thing that we're in is literally designed to walk. so the fact that we've not made it the norm is quite intriguing in itself, isn't it? So bringing it back into what our body's designed to do is a really important element of this work, and how we collaborate and learn about what we need to do in order to be able to make those connections and shift the barriers. It was certainly a theme running through ours. Just in terms of a couple of barriers that I think came up quite prominently, this whole space around community safety, and not just in I don't feel safe in this community because of the threat of others, but traffic, car parking, lack of footpaths, crossings, that whole dynamic that people that might be feeling a bit more anxious, might be not as confident, but the way they perceive, might have lived in a community for a long time and seen traffic grow incredibly from what it used to be 10, 20, 30 years ago. So there's a really interesting space there. We had an interesting conversation around education and bringing them into the space, and children and young people, and trying to get to building these habits early. So that was another thing that we started to explore. We had and this is the first time it's come up actually in all the workshops that we've done so far, Heather. We've had a conversation in some of the previous other workshops around the need for councillors and politicians to be in this, not necessarily this particular space, but connected to the work somehow because of the decision making side of things, both at a district and county council and the MP as well. But we also then had a little bit of a conversation about vested interests, conflicts of interest between what we might try to be doing and what housing developers might be trying to be doing, and what budgets might be focused on, and actually we've got to find a way of working through all of that if we're going to really try and unpick all of those barriers that might be in our way. We talked a little bit about engagement and the need to look at what that and bring residents in. Jonathan made a really great point right at the end of the call around bringing the skeptics in. Rather than being on the outside attacking it, can we bring them in and let's try and work through some of the barriers that might be put up? And I think that's a really excellent point. A few other organisations, and we didn't, we weren't sure of exactly who's in the room completely, but planners, highways, housing developers, traffic enforcement, police, community safety, they were all kind of things that were coming out, and then a recognition. I think one final point was around recognising that there's probably some things that we can change at a Bolsover level, but then there's probably some uniqueness to each of the kind of bigger communities and some of the rural communities that we would really need to consider the differences. Have I missed anything? Oh,
Great.
that's me.
Thanks, Scott. I feel like you had about half an hour in your room, because we didn't get that much in depth, but we did have good conversation. Ange, how did you do?
I'm just laughing. I've got to follow that. We didn't even get that far anyway. We focused on looking at where this work can fit. Obviously, there's a lot of already good practice around partnerships within Bolsover, through the Health and Wellbeing Partnership, around the Active Bolsover Partnership, but again recognise that it needed to be broadened out to more partners. But we didn't get onto that question, to be fair. We did talk about communities and engage. How do we go about engaging with the voluntary sector organisations and communities? Because that's probably not covered massively on this call. There will be partners missing. Then we also talked about existing work, which probably went a little bit off tangent in that, Bolsover's just got some shared prosperity funding that focuses on a lot of walking, cycling, and we really need to be bringing that work and some of the work that Malcolm and about doing trails networks. We need to look at what that means and how can we add value to it rather than setting up something completely different. And then we had a whole discussion around awareness of what already exists actually physically in things like the trails networks. And again, that's very practical, but looking at what already happens, how do we engage with families to use some of these networks? And I think that was it as far as we got, but basically there's some great work going on that we need to make sure that we link it into rather than just setting up something very different.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ange. Thank you very much. We had fairly similar discussions to the other groups. I say that because it makes my feedback much easier. Although, Ange, you're saying building on things. We talked about, yes, there's some great things that have happened, and we do have some really good systems in Bolsover. which may be a bit disjointed, and we can improve that system. And there's some new partners in the room that some of the group weren't particularly aware of and hadn't worked with previously, which is really brilliant. We talked about a kind of a starting from scratch thing. So really just thinking, what have we done before? How has it worked? And let's go back to basics, which was a really interesting point. And also there was some excitement in the room. So excitement, excited by the challenge was James's quote. When we talked about barriers, we talked about building trust, because there is some new relationships to build trust with. So some of that. One barrier that was I found really interesting was that there's lots that's happened and we know a lot, but do we necessarily articulate it and then learn from it and share it? So one of the barriers is managing to do that. So that's a really important point, which I thought was great. Yeah, there was a lot of acknowledgement about the good work that's already gone on, but a lot also about the fact that with the more system partners we get working together, the more we can achieve and the better we'll be. So just thank you for everyone for participation in that. It's a really good rounded conversation, I think. We're going to go into go on, Scott.
I just want to clarify a little bit, Heather, in terms of the conversation that you had with your group and Angela had. This what can feel like a tension between the strengths of what we've already got and the need to what do you say, build and get started, learn from what we've done and go again. And there isn't a tension there. One was like, we've got a set of strengths, let's be really clear about what they are. The second part of that is, what is the learning that we've got about how well those strengths work for some people and not others, and in that space that we don't have understanding of or where we're seeing where it's not working for some people, how well do we understand that, and what is it that we need to know in order to be able to go again? So I don't want it to feel that there's any kind of tension in that space. I think that's a healthy space. You know, the fact that we're starting with assets to build upon. Jade shared with me a network map, and I was like, wow. And the challenge we might not get is that there's certain groups of our community that are blatantly not using it. So what does that mean? What does that start to look like? How well do we start to understand that, so that we can start to try and create the change in behaviour for those groups? So these things are not conflicting with each other. They're actually helpful for each other.
Yeah, brilliant. A good point. Thanks, Scott. And I think that's part of your conversation, Ange, was about the networks that aren't known about, isn't it? And we've had that conversation before. Yeah. Exactly. Brilliant. Thank you very much. We'll go into a 5-minute break, and then we'll do we'll go over to Scott with his data. So if you want to just turn off your mics and your cameras for 5 minutes and then come back at 13:22, that'll be really helpful ish. Thank you. Moving didn't help me warm up then. In fact, it made me colder.
It's definitely getting colder.
It's definitely getting colder.
And there's a lot of layers, as we can see. I'm jealous. It looks like
Scott's putting his coat back on.
The sun's gone past my window. The temperature drops like 10 degrees. my fleece is
I had my
going back
woolly
up.
hat on yesterday, but I didn't put it on this call today.
I've had mine all day today and I've just whipped it off for this.
Yeah, exactly.
How special everyone is, eh?
Yeah. It's difficult to tell when everyone's back after we've had a break. This is something that I've learned.
Did we remember to press record again, by the way? Oh, well done, Nikki.
And well done you, Scott, for remembering to remember that.
Bit late, Matt, though, innit? We've had all the feedback.
I think we can probably assume that most people are back. Maybe not, because I feel like more people had a camera on before.
If I take my camera off, I am listening. It's because I'm eating.
That's all right. That might be the same for many.
Eating all day this morning. Red hearts. I've got some hearts. The festive ones are like Rudolph.
What is that?
Aaron, leave it on.
It's supposed to be.
They're like being at Twycross Zoo.
It's supposed to be a reindeer, but it looks like Roland Rat with horns on, if I'm honest with you.
No
Just
different.
the way you wear it.
Or we've got a turkey, but it looks a bit like a chicken. That's
Very
closest
festive.
I could get to festive, I'm afraid.
To be honest, I'd put one on just for the warmth.
Or both. Brilliant. I think we'll assume that most people are back now. Yeah, great discussions before. And so can we have a little think about, based on the conversations we've had and what you know so far, what your expectations are from this work? And if you just put your answers in the Mentimeter, which I think Nikki might be able to put back on again. I'll tell you what I find, if I click on it each time new, I don't get a repeated question. I just get a fresh question. So what are your expectations from this work?
Sorry, did you say that we'll click on that link that Nikki's just put in?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool.
What a great start those two are. Oh. Great. Yeah, I think that hyperlocal side of this is really, especially for something like a topography like Bolsover. Yeah, you know, that's such a difference, isn't there, with these towns and the rural side of it? Yeah, it's really interesting. Improve the health and well-being, joining things up. Yeah, joining things up. Brilliant. A clear offer of walking across the district. Building on the yeah, absolutely. Shared experience. I can't struggle. Invitation. I can't read the bottom ones now. They've gone off my screen, Nikki.
Sorry, I might have to take them off and then I might be able to tell you what they say. I can't figure out a way of sharing more than one page at once.
That's good. It's a good start. You know, thinking about how we learn, thinking about how we work together, thinking about, you know, how we start to focus on what shifts outcomes for people. Really positive, and building on the strengths of what we've already got is a great starting point. So thank you very much for that. Do you want to just sing for a minute or two, Heather, while I try and upload my slides? That's what we normally do. If she doesn't sing, by the way, you should probably complain, because she's sung on all the other workshops.
I think that's why we didn't get so many people. So I'll abstain.
Let me just.
Are you going to do a test when you do it, Scott?
I am going to do a test. Yes, I've got to find it first. That's the thing.
Nikki's now stolen the sharing, and she's got the bottom half of the page up.
Oh, well, Heather can try and, if there's any, yes, please. Well, I just try and find these.
Yeah, we've got shared experiences, a whole system approach, invitation and guidance for community groups to be active, linked to sustainable travel. Our most deprived areas have direct access to the network of trails. And what's that one on the left, Nikki? Far left. Create a neighbourhood ownership of people's own health. Yeah, brilliant. That's the ones on there, Scott.
That's perfect timing. So hopefully this is going to appear on people's screens.
Yep.
Right, can you all see it first? Can I get some nods for the, yeah, please. Right, now if I move on a slide, can you see what, has it changed slides for everyone? Yeah, getting nods, good, okay. Right, that's our test. If you can't see any other slides, well, it passed the test. No, if it does disappear, just let us know, because there is, you should be able to move the slides on yourself. There's a little arrow on your screen, and you can move the slides forward. If when it sounds like I've moved forward, if yours doesn't, you can do it yourself. Hopefully that'll work for you. But if you are having any problems, just shout. I've got about half an hour. I'm going to go through data in the main from an adult perspective. I've got one little slide right at the end using some children and young people's data, but that's at a Derbyshire level, but it's insightful nonetheless, and I can build on it a little bit. And I'm going to start by talking a little bit about physical inactivity, so people that are not moving enough for it to benefit their health. And then I'm going to try and connect that to walking. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we've organised the data that we get around walking in Bolsover. And then I'm going to connect those two things. And then I'm going to try and go into a bit of depth, both in terms of different parts of our community that might not be walking as much, and also trying to get it down into local places and just show you how we can do some of that. And there's some tools and resources that we can use. Just if you're not familiar, this data comes from the Active Lives survey for both adults, and then a separate survey for children and young people. For the adult survey, it's 500 sample across Bolsover every year, rolling sample throughout the year, and it collects across walking, as people said earlier on. Walking is one of the things that provides the most minutes to people. You know, with bodies literally designed to do it. So there's quite a bit of data in here that we can do with around walking and who walks and so on and so forth. So let me just start with kind of putting this into a little bit of context of physical inactivity. What you've got on here, the lines that you need to be bothered about are the red and the green ones. That's the data for Bolsover over the 6 years, and they've got the timeline across the year for the years of data that we've got. The red line is the proportion of people that are physically inactive in Bolsover for each of the 6 years of data that we've got. You can see in the first 4 years, in that kind of shaded box, which is basically the pre-pandemic years that we've got the data, that it was pretty flat. Then it dropped down, you know, quite a bit. And then the pandemic's come along and pushed it back up higher than what it was at baseline. And now we've got over a third of adults in Bolsover that are physically inactive. What do I mean by being physically inactive? A chief medical officer recommends that we do 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity a week. If you're doing that, you're in the green proportion at the top. Those green dots that are set out in that top green line. I use this term moderate intensity. Get your heart rate up. You might sweat a little bit, but you'll certainly get warmer. A brisk walk for the vast majority of people is enough to reach moderate intensity, unless you're really fit. Then it might not. But for the vast majority of people, a brisk walk is enough to get into moderate intensity. Okay, that red line represents people that are doing less than 30 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity in the last week. So it's not a lot of time. And you can just see how high it is. That pattern in the pandemic is a national pattern. It's put the pandemic pushed inactivity up, and then it's dropped back a little in the latest year of data that we got that covered November 20 to November 2021. Okay, so and if you're looking at the England data and thinking, oh, Bolsover is miles worse than England, well, we'd expect it to be, because the makeup of Bolsover community is nothing like the demographic makeup of England. Okay, so for example, you've got more people with a limited illness or disability that make up your local population, and you've got more people in lower socioeconomic groups than England does have. So comparing Bolsover to England is really unfair, because demographically you don't look like each other. So just keep that in mind. We still do it because we're statos and we're a bit weird like that, but it also gives us a reference point. So, and it helps us start to think through why we might be seeing some of those differences. Okay, so we've got this situation within activity where it was kind of heading downwards possibly, and then it's jumped back up because of the pandemic. Walking data, this is a little bit different. So what we've tried to do here, as you can imagine, this survey asks everybody what activities they do and how much they do of it. And what we've tried to do is we've tried to marry this up with Heather's challenge around frequency. We want people walking every day. Okay, and so in order to analyze the data, we've had to do a couple of things which I'll talk you through now. Firstly, we've decided to put on a kind of time limit. Okay, so what you've got at the bottom, 4 in 10 people that are not walking. Well, what does that mean? Well, that's 4 in 10 people in Bolsover are not doing one session of 10 minutes or more walking a week, or in the past 28 days, sorry, not doing one session. So they might be doing lots of 5-6 minute walks, but they're not getting over the 10-minute. So we've grouped them as not walking. Okay, so that bottom group is 40% of adults in Bolsover and not doing one session of 10 minutes or more in a month. Okay, the group above that is the group that are doing between 1 and 7 sessions a month. You know, so up to a couple of times a week. The group above that is those that are doing between 8 and 27 sessions a month, so 2 to 6 sessions of 10 minutes or more in a week. And then the group at the top is doing 28 sessions a month, so the equivalent of 1 a day. Now, we can't say it is 1 a day because the data is not collected on a daily basis like that, so we can't all we can do is show it as a bit of a proxy that people are doing 28 sessions, but they might have done 2 sessions on one day and none the following day, and we can't kind of tease all that out in the data. So we've used these groupings of, you know, those numbers of sessions just to try and put people into kind of behaviors of not walking a bit less regularly, walking fairly regularly, and then our regular walkers. And then you've got the proportions in Bolsover of adults that fall into each of those categories. And I'm going to be exploring this in quite a bit of depth later. The first thing that I want to do, though, is just connect that back to inactivity. So does walking matter to getting people active? And the answer is, yeah, it really does. Okay, so what you've got here, just start on the left-hand side of this chart. You've got our not walking group. Okay, so that's 4 in 10 adults. Remember, that was about 40% of adults in Bolsover. And what that data is showing you, the red chunk that's below the line is telling us that of that 40% of adults in Bolsover that are not walking, 82% of them are inactive. They're not getting over the 30-minute thresholds, and only 13% of them are active. So what does that mean? Well, it means 13% of the population, just over 1 in 10 people, find a way of being active in Bolsover that doesn't involve walking or walking for over 10 minutes. They get their minutes in other ways. That group is likely to be younger adults and more affluent people that might be reliant on gyms and sport and playing football or whatever it might be, cycling possibly, and that's the way they get their minutes, and they don't really do much walking. Okay, but what I want you to look at is move along one column. Look at how the 80% drops to 4% of people in 4% of people in Bolsover that are inactive if they're walking less regularly. Remember, less regularly was only up to a couple of times a week of getting to 10 minutes or more. So if we get people doing a little bit, just look how more likely they are to be physically active. And look at how that green tower jumps. And then obviously, as you can imagine, you walk more regularly, you're collecting more minutes, you're much more likely to be, you get your total 150 minutes, and you might get them all from walking. But just getting people to do 1, 2, you know, times a week, 10 minutes or more, people are more likely to then get into being physically active and more likely to be achieving the chief medical officer's recommended. So there is a very clear association here, as we'd expect it to be, between walking and actually achieving our the health benefits that the chief medical officer wants us to achieve. What you've got here now is the 6 years of data for those 4 groups that I introduced to you a couple of slides ago. They're not walking, they're walking less regularly, fairly regulars, and the people that are walking regular. The bit that I want you to just look at the pattern. You can see how the not walking pattern, you know, has been pretty stable. It dropped in 18-19. It's pushed back almost up to where it was baseline. Remember, inactivity's gone above baseline, but the not walking group has not quite gone worse than what it was in 2015-16. The bit that I'm intrigued on here, because I've been doing, how many have we done now? Either 5, is this 5, number 5? So I've been looking at the data from across different districts in Derbyshire now. And what's really interesting with Bolsover is 2 things. The 39.3 is the highest in Derbyshire in terms of the proportion of not walkers, but the 15.3 at the top, that's not the worst in Derbyshire. That's probably mid-table, if not a bit, top 40, it's probably about 4th in the list out of the 8, is it? Yeah, something like that. So what's really interesting is there's a group of people in Bolsover that are walking really regularly, and is comparable to some of the areas that have got much lower levels of people that are not walking. But we have got this rather large chunk of people that are not walking at all. And the bit where the difference comes between Bolsover and those places is in the lighter green proportion. That is one of the lowest proportions of people that are walking fairly regularly. For some reason, we've got a smaller proportion of that in the Bolsover, and we've got a much higher proportion at the bottom. So there's something in that which would, I think, relate to some of that infrastructure that I saw earlier. There's some people that are really used to using that infrastructure, but there's also some people that aren't, and we need to think about what that might look like. Just moving it on now and getting into a bit more detail. I'm going to slowly just bring you into a bit more detail step by step. What you've got here now is different demographic groups. Let me just explain a couple. They might not be. The age ranges are quite obvious on there. Gender are quite obvious. No limiting illnesses is that people without a limiting illness or disability. Limiting illness is people with a limiting illness or disability. NSSEC is socioeconomic classification, and it's collected by the census. And when we all fill in the census, like we did in March 2021, we answer 7 questions, and the Office of National Statistics use those 7 questions to put every household with people between 16 and 74 into a socioeconomic classification. Okay, NSSEC 6 to 8 are people in lower socioeconomic groups. What on earth does that mean? Well, it's people that are in routine and semi-routine work, retail work, cleaners, labourers on building sites, that kind of occupation. NSSEC 8 is people that are long-term unemployed and long-term sick, disabled. So you've got this group and this part of our community, which is a big part of Bolsover community, by the way, is about 40% of the local community that fall within lower socioeconomic groups, and about 40%, of those people are not walking. Okay, limiting people with a limiting illness, we've got up to 44%. The surprising one on here is men. That's all men, by the way, all men. So, and look at the difference with women, particularly on the not walking. When you look at the top, they're very similar. So regular walkers, there isn't a gender split, but for some reason, men have got a considerably higher proportion of not walking than women. Why? What's going on there? How do we try and understand that a little bit more in our engagement? The other interesting bit on here, by the way, is when we've looked at all of the other ones, 16 to 34-year-olds have been much higher towards the left than they are in Bolsover. Okay, this is a group that doesn't like walking. And that's a pattern that we've seen across the county and in other areas. But what I would say is, apart from the female and the NSSEC 1 to 2, all of those towers are high in terms of the not walking part of it. and even the NSEC 1 to 2 and female, they're quite high in comparison to some other areas. But we've just got to remember that the demography of Bolsover doesn't quite look like other parts of Derbyshire, so it's not a fair comparison either. But then we've got some really resilient, like, look at some of the tops. We've got up to 20% of our 55 to 74-year-olds that are walking regularly. Almost 20% of our middle socioeconomic groups, NSEC 3 to 5, that are walking regularly. There's some really strong behaviours amongst some groups, but we've got this really interesting split. A group that are walking regularly, and then a group that just isn't walking at all, or certainly not getting over 10 minutes. And we need to be thinking about what that means for what we want to try and understand going forward, what those different barriers might be in way of different groups. Another way of showing you that not walking data, now that's all you've got now, is you've just got the not walking. So like we're going back to a trend line like we did on the first slide for physical activity. So this is 6 years of data for each of these different demographic groups, and you know, just plotting the trend over those 6 years for not walking, and you can just see how high that not walking group is for males. Dropped down a bit pre-pandemic, jumped back up because of the pandemic, stayed pretty high. Okay, compare that to the female line below it. Look at how low the female not walking has been at one point, 27%. Let's get them all down that way, and we'll see a massive difference in walking levels, and we'll see a massive difference in physical activity levels if we could get everybody down towards that 27. The bit that struck me the most on this slide, though, is and I haven't coloured it in, but and I'm trying to get my head around it. Look how little inequality there is between the different socioeconomic groups. Now, there has been at times a bit more of an inequality, but it's not huge. That inequality in some other parts of Derbyshire is really striking, with NSEC 1 to 2 having much lower proportions of people not walking, and then NSEC 6 to 8 being a similar proportion that Bolsover's got. So you've got this huge inequality. Actually, we haven't got that inequality. Is that related to gender in some way? Is it men in our higher socioeconomic and middle socioeconomic groups that are maybe not walking as much as we'd like them to be? There's something to really try and unpick there. Is it, you know, the topography of the system, and you know, the way that the Bolsover land lays, that means puts us in our car and makes the car you know, dominant in our daily lives. We've got to start trying to unpick that and understanding it at a local and as we've discussed earlier, hyper local level. There's another group that's not on here that I'd like to mention. We don't get enough data at Bolsover level for our diverse communities. And so I can't give you anything, sadly. I can tell you a little bit about the Derbyshire data, and there is a Derbyshire data pack that's got ethnicity in it. And what we know from that ethnicity data is that our Black and Asian communities are the least likely to walk, and the proportion of not walking amongst those parts of our communities is very high. And so we need to just be thinking about the diversity. You know, Justina was mentioning earlier that she's working with a Polish community. That, you know, exploring, understanding, bringing that voice into this work would be really helpful. We've had to aggregate the data now. What do I mean by that? We've taken all 6 years of data for Bolsover and put it all in the same pot, and we've analysed that. So instead of doing year to year like we've just been showing you, kind of adding it all up so that we can look at some other groups. And what this shows us is just some other groups when we split it by work status. You know, students, not massive challenge in Bolsover. In other parts of the county, students is one of the worst groups of not walking. So Bolsover is different in that space. But what I was struck by here is not that unemployed's highest, because we've seen that in a couple of other places, but just the consistency between unemployed, not working, and working full and part-time. Not working, by the way, would include all retired people, but it would also include people that are in this group called looking after family and home, and that would include carers, and it would include mums that are looking after children and not working, and they're choosing not to be in the workforce. Okay, but the consistency in those three, the bottom parts of not walking amongst those, is the striking bit, because they're often not consistent like that. Working is usually much lower. So again, why are we seeing that is the bit that I'd really like to try and understand in the work going forward. And then another thing that just kind of shows you that actually the challenge that we've got in terms of not walking is quite a widespread challenge. So what you've got here is it's split by IMD, indices of multiple deprivation. I'll get a bit geeky for a minute. The indices of multiple deprivation is 7 different indices that they put together, and they use those to put areas of the whole country into 10 groups. Group 1 is the most deprived areas. Group 10 is the least deprived areas. We can't get the data at a Bolsover level for each of those 10 groups, so we've had to put them into 4 groups. So what you've got on the left-hand side here is the most deprived quartile of communities, so the most deprived quarter of communities, and then on the right you've got the least deprived quarter of communities in Bolsover. Yes, there is some difference, but again, in some places the inequality between the most deprived and the least deprived is really big. Here it's not. So this would start environments coming into this. Patterns of working patterns is coming into this. How do we start to understand some of that information and some of that from our conversations with residents to be able to put alongside our knowledge from this data? I'm going to just drill into lower socioeconomic communities, a part of our community, a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down and do a little bit about lower socioeconomic communities. I'm then going to do a little bit about the way that the patterns of behaviour of changing, looking at whether people are walking for leisure, walking for travel, and then I'm going to start to try and connect that to local communities, and then I'm going to really plant a seed in for us to think about why we might be seeing some of the things that we're seeing. Okay, so this is the data that you're looking at now is just for people that are within lower socioeconomic communities. Okay, so within lower socioeconomic communities, look at the gender inequality. It's not quite as large as it was on the when we looked at the whole population. The gap's narrowed a bit between men and women, but they're still at either end of this chart, which is really fascinating. We haven't had that anywhere else. So we've got this women finding a way to do at least a bit more walking than men are. Then you've got this shift. Look at, 16 to 34 year olds have gone much more towards the left, as have our 55 to 74 year olds. So we've got this split, and we've got some nuances within our lower socioeconomic communities. What is it that women are doing that are helping them walk, get some walking in? I'll come back to that using some data from somewhere else a little bit later, just to maybe plant a seed. But we do have some differences, all of them over 10% in terms of regular walkers, but that's got a bit smaller, hasn't it? Now, if you remember where I started off at 15% in terms of the whole population. So we're not getting as many regular walkers maybe as we'd like from within our lower socioeconomic communities. We know, you'll have to stick with me on these next couple of slides. I need to get a bit geeky to explain them, but they're really helpful, I hope. So we know the pandemic has shifted the way that we've got our minutes. Of course it has. Chris Whitty stood there on a daily basis and said, don't go out of your house. If you go out of your house, you're allowed to go out for 1 hour, and that's to do some exercise. But a lot of the exercise that a lot of us used to do had gone. We couldn't go and play our football. We couldn't go and play our cricket or ride our. We could probably ride our mountain bike, but provision. Our leisure centres were shut, and we had this 1 hour window. So of course it's changed behaviour. Well, it's changed walking patterns as well. So start with the towers on the left hand side. What you've got there is the light blue tower is walking for leisure, and the dark blue tower is walking for travel. So in 2015-16. On average, Bolsover adults were doing 7 sessions of walking for leisure and 5 sessions of walking for travel. And if you're wondering why the tower that's only got 5 sessions is bigger than the 7 sessions, well, the walking for travel sessions were longer. The depth of the box relates to the length of the session. So the deeper the box, the longer the session was. Now look what's happened to it. It jumped up to 8, that dropped to 4, 7, 5, 6, 4, 7, 2, 9, 3. So we now got a situation where we've got more sessions happening of walking for leisure. What's interesting, this hasn't happened everywhere, but walking for travel has bounced back a bit in the latest year, which is really positive, because in some places this has dropped down even further, and walking for travel is really not on people's radars. Bolsover's showing some slight signs of it might be improving, but you can start to see that people switched walking for travel, or some people switched walking for travel for walking for leisure, which is good, but maybe not everybody could have done that. To show you in a slightly different way, this is minutes from either walking for leisure or walking for travel. Look what happened. It kind of peaked a few years ago, dropped down a little bit, dropped down again, walking for leisure in the first part of the pandemic. That's a bit different to a lot of Derbyshire. A lot of Derbyshire went up and went up again. Bolsover dropped down and then has had a big increase in the latest year. Walking for travel fluctuated around a little bit more, dropped down and has come back a bit. We want that trend to come back, keep coming back. It's really important. Walking for travel plays a big role in physical activity levels for young adults, for our diverse communities, for lower socioeconomic groups. You know, if it disappears, it's likely that inactivity for those groups is going to get worse. So we've got to be thinking about that. And I will come back to what might be kind of at play with some of this data by stealing something from somewhere else in a minute or two. Just bringing it back out to the whole of Bolsover, and we can get some data from Sport England. This hasn't been updated since the pandemic happened, though. So remember, this is pre-pandemic. What on earth are you looking at? You're looking at a heat map. The darker the red, the higher the level of inactivity is estimated to be through this modelling work that Sport England has done. These are areas called middle super output areas. So in each of these little coloured patches, between 5,000 and 15,000 people live in them. Okay, the darker the red, the higher inactivity. But this doesn't really help us, does it? You know, yeah, okay, so it tells us where some of the really high areas of inactivity is. But can we get underneath the skin of that a little bit and get it really down to places like Shirebrook and Bolsover? Leave it with me. I've got to get a bit geeky again, though, to explain what we've done. Out there is a model that the Office of National Statistics provide called Output Area Classification. What on earth is that? Well, I've just told you about a middle super output area, which is between 5,000 and 15,000 people. An output area is like a smaller little chunk of area, which is up to 1,000 people. And so just keep that in your mind. What the Office of National Statistics do is they put the whole of the population of England and Wales, possibly Scotland, I don't know, into 75 different groups of people where you share like demographics. So it'll say things. People in this little group of people are more likely to be of Asian heritage. They're maybe more likely to live in terraced housing or detached housing. They're more likely to have children or car ownership. It brings in this demographic description of these 75 different groups. These 75 groups build up to 25 groups, 75 subgroups, 25 groups, 8 supergroups. What you've got here is the data for 5 of the 8 supergroups in Bolsover. Okay, and these titles, by the way, they're not my titles, so please don't ask me why they're called what they're called. You can get a document which we can put in the chat later where it describes the supergroups, the groups, the subgroups, and you can get this pen portrait that brings them to life. But what I want you to just I want you to remember a couple of the titles as we go into the next page. Constrained city dwellers, urbanites, hard pressed living. Okay, all of them, particularly the first two, number 7 and number 5, high levels of people that are not walking. Okay, why am I telling you this? Well, I'm going to go back to that output area bit now. We can get this data of which parts of our community that group or that subgroup is likely to live in down to a very local area level. Okay, so you've got Bolsover on your screen now, and it is coloured in by the different supergroups. So if you remember rightly, constrained city dwellers and urbanites, brown and blue, are where we've got streets living where there's a lot of people that fall into those groups, and the likelihood of not walking is going to be pretty high. Okay, now it just helps us get local. It helps us try and understand who's living on these streets and how we might be able to think about reaching them and who might connect with them, and how do these parts of our community connect with green spaces and those trails and that infrastructure that we've all been kind of mentioning as a strength locally. I've put Bolsover on here. There's a link on this slide when we share the slide deck where you can go in and and this is a free tool that you can use, and you can get it. You can go in and zoom into any community in the country, you know, so obviously the rest of Bolsover, and it just helps us think about where, who and where, and gets us really into the bit of detail. Right, I'm going to use some data now from Greater Manchester. We haven't got it for Derbyshire, which is frustrating. We might want to try and get it for Derbyshire as part of this work going forward, which would be really lovely for people like me to then help you try and make sense of it. But it's really shifted my thinking. And go back to that pattern now that we've seen around walking for leisure increasing, walking for travel. This is a slide from Greater Manchester, and so it's not Derbyshire. Keep that in mind, please, because Greater Manchester doesn't look anything like Derbyshire, but some of this is going to be relevant in my view, but it is still an assumption. What you're looking at here is some data that Greater Manchester collected in 2019, December 2019, just before the pandemic, of the places that people usually walk to, okay? Look at where work is in the list, because the assumption that I had in my head when I saw the kind of walk for travel data drop like it has and the walk for leisure data go up was that, well, that's people working from home. That's what got to answer that. Look at how low work is on this list. Look at where people walk to: green spaces, park, primary school, places of worship, GP, health surgery, job centre, banking, post office, secondary school. You can read the list. Now, what's striking about that list? Did it hit me straight away? And then I went, oh, think about things that have gone online because of the pandemic. You'll have heard all the news about people moaning about not being able to see their GP and going online. Job centres have gone online. Banks have gone online. Used to be 4 banks in the town that I moved into 7 years ago. There isn't one now. Shopping's gone online. You'll see more delivery vans around. These things, for some part of our community that used to walk to them, they're not coming back. They're really not coming back. So we really do need to start to think about, where do people want to walk to? How do we connect people to places that they want to go to? Some of these services for some part of our communities will come back. We know the older generation, me included in that, I'd prefer to go and see my GP, thank you very much. But young people, young adults that have spent the whole of their life online, makes no difference to them. They're used to being in their services online. They're comfortable with it, but some people aren't. So what does that mean to the way that we connect our infrastructure to places? What places is it that we want to connect it to? What does it mean for that housing estates that were mentioned in my group earlier, that we're building on the edge of it? Well, how well are they connected? How well can people walk to potentially some of these things? Because these are the important things. Is one of the reasons why we've got a difference between men and women in Bolsover is that it's the women that are escorting the kids to school and doing the school run. You know, I don't know these things, but it's food for thought for us to be thinking differently about what people want to go to and how we connect people to place. One final slide, and then a couple more comments before I finish. Children and young people, as I mentioned earlier, the data sample at a Bolsover level isn't robust enough year on year for us to be looking at this. We can, if people want us to, probably aggregate the data. There's some new children and young people data coming out in early next year, and once we've got that data, we've probably got enough to maybe aggregate the whole of the sample and do some analysis of walking. If that's an interest to some places, it might not be an interest everywhere, but so it might be something to try and work on in New Year. So I'm going to show you a slide from at a county level here, just to help. What you've got here, children and young people, by the way, are meant to do very different levels of physical activity. We need them to do an hour a day, at least an hour a day on average, because of, they need to move to get healthy development, not just for maintaining health, but to grow well. And what you've got here is the impact of, we've only got 4 years of data at the moment that we can break down. What you've got here is the impact of the pandemic on walking levels for children and young people. It's only once a week though. Okay, look at how it jumped when the pandemic came along in the pandemic year. We've heard from the headlines of the new data that children and young people's activity levels have improved significantly in the last school year. What that looks like for walking yet, I don't know. But what I do know in terms of this increase that we've seen in the pandemic is it's been driven mainly, not completely, but mainly by children in low affluence families and girls. Okay, two groups that historically have experienced some of the largest inequalities when it comes to sport and physical activity. And we're seeing walking rates shift quite dramatically amongst those groups. Why? The other bit that's really striking with this is the teenage girls situation. We're now seeing 3 years of data that
gone.
Left us on a cliffhanger. I'm hoping it's only temporary.
tells.
You're back,
There we go.
I'm still talking to myself.
You've just left us with a cliffhanger about teenage girls and 3
We're
years
back.
of data. Yes.
Oh, you didn't miss much. I was talking to myself for a bit longer, but never mind. So why 3 years of data activity levels increasing amongst teenagers? Why? Walking. So what is it about walking and teenage girls that, can we bottle it? Can we learn from it? Can we see how it applies to other parts of our community that are not walking as much as we'd like them to be? There is something there that we can need to try and think about how we learn from it, because it's a real positive. I'm done. I think that's the key messages. Oh, there's one thing that I haven't said, and I know, and I would like to. I scared the living daylights out of some people in Active Derbyshire yesterday when I showed them a slide around the impact of the climate on sea levels. And what's scary when I show, I'm not going to show it today because I'd end up getting too carried away. But what this slide shows is potentially the areas of the east of Lincolnshire, so the east coast of Lincoln, Hull, all the way down to Norfolk, that's going to be underwater at least once a year, not from flooding from the rain, but from the sea. Okay, what's going to happen to that population when the sea starts flooding their houses? Those that can are going to go to higher ground. Where's the nearest higher ground? Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire for a lot of those people. It's coming around into Doncaster potentially. Now, these are only projections. It might not happen. But if it does happen, the shift in the population will be rapid and huge. And Bolsover and some of the neighbouring places are going to be the closest places to move to. Climate and getting people out of their cars, it's coming. Whether we like it or not, climate change is happening. We're going to have to get people out of cars, and walking is the easiest way of doing it without doing any pollution. So we've got to be putting this into our mix. I don't know where Bolsover is with declaring a climate emergency or anything like that, but there's a really impetus for this work, which is we need people walking on their own feet a lot more than they currently do, and we've got to try and think about how we reduce car usage, whether we like it or not, because it is going to happen. I'm done. Is there any questions, any thoughts? Anyone still awake? I can still see some people on my screen and they're still awake, but not everybody always is when I've finished.
I'm just glad I live on a hill, Scott.
I showed the slide to some colleagues in Lincolnshire, and it was on a Teams call like this, and everybody got off their chair and came and one of the guys was like, "I've just bought a house there."
Yeah,
like, well,
no, it's interesting. No, that really good style. I really enjoyed that commentary on that data. That's really useful. And like I say, I can use snippets of that in lots of other bits of work that we're working on around physical activity and wider determinants, ELF stuff. So yeah, really interesting. I think it gives us a few areas to drill into. You know, that 6 out of 10 people not walking much at all. You know, is there something we can drill into that? You know, people that are unemployed are a lot less likely to walk. That's interesting to us. Is there something we can drill into that? So I think there's some snippets there that if we are looking at evidence basis to get that an informed decision about where we go next, I think there's absolutely some areas we can find some more information out about. So thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Malcolm, is it? Malcolm?
It's Malcolm and Matt. We were just wondering, how many, do we know what proportion of the walkers are dog owners?
I got asked this question yesterday. No, we need to be having a conversation with Sport England to say, if do you walk with a dog? It's not in the data. No. So in the data source that I've used here, it doesn't ask whether you're walking a dog.
Yeah, is there a correlation between the frequency of walking and dog ownership? Because if you got
well, I would say there is, and I would also, but what I would also say is, and I'm going to get a bit geeky. You remember I mentioned the moderate intensity earlier. One of the activities where people end up being classified as inactive. So we can break inactive down to those that are sedentary, those that are doing physical activity but not doing it vigorous enough, called light only. So when they fill in the survey, it's they ask whether their heart rate up and they get a bit warmer, they say no. And what activities are those people that say no? They're only doing that they're doing only light activities, more likely to be doing walking and gardening. So about 25% of all minutes nationally, 25% of all walking minutes nationally are light only. So dog walkers, if all they're doing is walking their dog, and then they say they don't get that, it doesn't get their heart rate up because they've got a small dog that stops a lot, whatever it might be. So they might be out for a walk for half an hour, but they're stopping and starting and they're not getting their heart rate up. Well, they'll still be inactive. And so there is this really interesting thing, which I think is really important to think about. Those that aren't walking at all, those that are doing a bit of walking, probably need very, very different tactics, or could be receptive to very different tactics to create change.
Yeah. The other bit of useful data I found recently was for travel to work, in that Bolsover's got the highest number of people travelling to work by car in Derbyshire.
Yes, this is absolutely important stuff here. You know, if your major employers are dispersed and possibly not even in the district, then it's pushing people. And what's your transport infrastructure like? What's your bus infrastructure like? We're into some big questions that this work's got to start to pose, you know, towards people about decision making. Go back to the situation that I mentioned earlier. We haven't got a choice. This concept that electric cars will help. It won't. Tire pollution is the evidence that's growing around the destructive impact of tire pollution is enormous. We have to get people out of their cars, which means we need to start thinking quite differently about how our neighbourhoods are connected and how we get people to work.
Yeah, but also cycling to work data, Bolsover was about 0.7%.
Is that in the latest data, Matt?
Yeah, it's from last year's census. It's just come out.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, so I have started to see that come out, which this helps us, doesn't it? And what we can do with that census data, we can see which groups are walking to work or active travelling to work and who aren't, and how does that marry up with this data?
Yeah, there's some data about distance people travel to work as well. I think for Bolsover, it's the most is between 10 and 20 kilometres.
Right. So possibly cyclable.
Well, possibly cycling, but it also suggests that more people work outside the district than in it.
Yeah, than in. Yeah. These are some of the challenges we need to wrestle with. Steve?
I'm just, blown away by everything we've just seen. So brilliant. Just begin to try and unpick it all in my mind and see how it would land. I think there has to be this generational shift towards being more physically active. The data shows that that's not the case. But also there's a high proportion of individuals in Bolsover district who have long-term health conditions, disabilities, that probably need the access to enable them to get out and do walking. I found that in my previous job in Mansfield. It was all about access and availability, and I think there definitely needs to be better education about how this can. It's almost health by stealth, how you can ingrain it in young people to take it forward so they are making informed decisions. And you could tie it into things like climate change. We're doing this to save the planet. I'm not quite sure what the message is at the minute, but there definitely needs to be that generational shift so we can move people on. One thing that I think is really important is that social mobility in Bolsover in general is quite poor. And that's something I've picked up in the past few months. People don't travel out of the wards to go to other wards to do things. Now, I know there's the Bolsover Trail and all sorts of things, all sorts of wonderful provision across the district and some absolutely wonderful people behind it. But I do think we probably all need to come together and think quite differently about the infrastructure, about how we get that next generation being more physically active and hearing their voice about how that can be put in place. That's all I have to say.
I agree completely, Steve. The final question for me, if there's no other comments or thoughts, and it's just building on Malcolm and Matt's point there. What other information? We've got the census stuff like that where we can certainly build up and start to bring in. But what else have we got locally? What else do we? What other engagement locally have we got that we can maybe have got the voice of some of the groups that we know that we've got higher levels of not walking amongst? What other intelligence can we bring around this that we need to be putting into the mix for the workshops in the new year? It would be one of my questions to everyone here. And then my final question related to that, I said one, didn't I? Now I've stolen another one. The other bit would, for those people that we've talked about that are not here, it's going to be hard for Jade and Heather to get those people into room because they might not have the relationships with them. So if you've got some relationships with some of those people that you think need to be in this conversation, then I'd encourage you all to think about how you use that personal relationship to get people in here, because I think some of these things that are coming out around connection to work, connections of different groups to the infrastructure that they're really important things that we've got to explore.
Jade, you had your hand up.
Well, it was a delayed hand, and I think actually Scott managed to build on it, and it was kind of building on that. And in our working group, I think I mentioned earlier, is how do we do this with communities? It's great, the data's fascinating, and I love the data and listening to Scott. I am a data geek as well, but how does it help us understand who we want to know more about and have some real life conversations? And as Scott said, where are those conversations already happening? They might not be about physical activity, but there might be some really useful intelligence in there that can help us understand the local picture in even more detail. So yeah, not another question, just building on that really.
Thanks, Jade, and that kind of dovetails quite nicely into our next steps really. So our next steps are taking some time away to think about the data that we've just heard and what we already know, and letting it settle into our brains a little bit, and then come back together face to face on the 19th of January. So we've got a face to face event on the 19th of January at the Doley Centre in Mansfield, and we're going to use that space there to talk about what has the data told us about areas that we need to focus on. How can we encourage those areas to change the behaviour or make different choices? How do we work meaningfully with our communities to co-produce the ideas and where we're going, and what is the common purpose of what we're going to be doing in Bolsover? So if we can get a really good group of people to have some fantastic conversation at that event there, I mean, today's just the start, and we've already seen something's gone really good in Bolsover where there's loads of people in the room and some different people that we maybe weren't expecting, which is fantastic. Can we grow that again? Can we make this event really, really positive? And we can start to do, somebody in my group said something fantastic, what I didn't share before. And he said something, it was Alex, where is my notes? What did he say? Something about how do we, how do we visually present our successes and our values to inspire other people, which is fantastic. And I think that's a really good point. And that's where we need to, we've done this really good work here. We've got loads of people in the room. Let's keep growing it and keep the excitement going. So it'd be really good if we can get more people. And as Scott said, if you've got those links, get talking to those people, get them in the room. Final Mentimeter of the day, having heard everything that you've listened to today and had some thoughts, where do you feel that you fit into this work? And I think, yeah, Nikki's put the link on again, so that's great. So just have a think about where you feel that you fit into this work and maybe how you could take it forward. And Jade really helpfully put a link to the face-to-face event in the chat as well, which is great. And we will send that out again as well, so you can send it to any people that you know who you feel should come. So we've got, where do you feel you fit into this work? Haven't been involved in today's session. Prevention agenda for the ICS and the ICP. You can see some people who are thinking really hard.
This one's a bit more difficult to get to one word, though.
You don't need one word. I think you've got 250 characters. If you can think of one word, share it. Joining partners up, reporting progress and challenges to Bolsover. Partnership, ensuring the work links to other things. Links to Eastern European communities and further BAME groups. Building on work already delivered around this agenda for the last 17 years. Fully able to support this work and highlights how we need to work differently to affect some stubborn inequalities and around physical activity. I think that might be it that's coming in, which is fine because we can't work out how to share the second page, so that's great. So I think unless anybody's got any other questions, we can, oh, go on, Jade, you have.
Well, I was just wondering, for those people that didn't have a chance to put anything in the chat, if people were unsure and wanted a conversation, I'm more than happy to connect with them between now and the next session about if they've got some ideas how that might work, or just encouraging people to come into the conversation, and hopefully the next session will be a bit more about what we're going to be doing and a bit more of a practical approach if that doesn't make sense just at the moment. So sorry to interrupt, Heather.
No, that's fabulous. And the next session will hopefully kickstart how we move things forward then, won't it, Jade? So yeah, that's brilliant. I think Nikki's just putting in the chat a little link to some feedback, which will be really helpful if you could fill it in and let us know how you feel today's session's gone. If there's anything we can build on, change, and that can help us as we move forward. And just one final real thank you from me for the amount of people who've come here today and the really good conversation that's happened. It's been really good. Aaron's not here to put on his Merry Christmas hat, but for anyone who's finishing this week, Merry Christmas as well, and thank you very much.
Thanks everyone. Merry Christmas.
Thanks everyone.